We work with architecture which is not a double banked but a single banked structure, where you have the central split or the central space between the two built formats. What we did realize is that there is a great potential, especially amongst the local people, to build with mud. So the idea of us to go back to load bearing structures was a way to understand how construction was done in the past, and how a lot of these load bearing structures stand the test of time even today. So it's not the build, but it's the fact that we were able to collaborate with a series of people forming a great community, and which is essentially what this piece of architecture is. Our projects at the stage of completion or towards the stage of completion, where we look at it purely from an architectural point of view.
A warm good afternoon from the Architects Diary. Today, we have with us Aditya, the principal architect and founder of HabitArt Architecture Studio. The firm is based in Bangalore and crafts bespoke spaces grounded in earth centric design principles. The brainchild of Aditya, HabitArt started in 2017 with the intent of understanding climate responsive and sensitive architecture. Having worked with Mistry Architects and interned at HOH Studio, his inclination towards working with various forms of mud and clay has come to life in the ongoing journey of Habitat. The firm is doing an exceptional job with its sustainable and community centric approach to design. It's an honor to have you, Aditya, today. And without further ado, let us begin with an insightful presentation from you, followed by an interview session.
Sure. Hi Simran, thanks for the wonderful introduction, right? And once again, we thank Architects Diary for this wonderful initiative. And I think you'll have a very wonderful outreach to a lot of architects, and you've been able to give us a lot of insight into what kind of work architects across the country are doing. And I think that gives a lot of us that kind of inspiration to see how people kind of step outside their boundaries. And it's also really nice to see the kind of work that's happening through the length and breadth of this country, right? And yeah, so it's a wonderful feeling and a wonderful wonderful this thing to be a part of this initiative and be a part of the tadpod series,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so I think shall we go ahead with the presentation, or
Yes,
would you like
yes.
us to start
We
with
can go with the presentation.
Yeah. So please let me know if my screen is visible.
Yes, it's visible.
It's visible.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll just do a small, I'll start off this presentation. But what I would also like to do is I'd like to, give a sort of a prelude into who we are as architects and what it is that we do. So this picture that you see over here is essentially our entire team, right? So we are a collective of individuals who we essentially have the same what do you call frame of thought process, right? And essentially all of us are enthusiasts when it comes to developing architecture in its grounded form. And we look towards striving and trying to understand what are the various forms of architecture that we can develop through the potential of working with earth, right? And so this is us essentially as a team. And then I think all the work that you see out there is put by these wonderful guys who've been a part of this entire process. We started off in 2017, and the process has been slow, but I think at the same time it's been quite rewarding for us to be here. And I think it's taken a good 6 to 7 years for us to realize who we are as individuals, and what we are capable in terms of in terms of working with nature and the potential of earth, right? So further up, I'll just start off with some of the projects in our portfolio that we've been doing over the last few years, right? And this is a recent one that had been completed. In fact, it has even been published on the Architects Diary. This is the National School of Business, or right as of now, it's known as NSB Bangalore, and this is essentially a project which is designed for an institutional campus. So essentially, this is an MBA campus, and this building is an add-on to an existing institution. So we haven't planned the institution from grounds up, but this is essentially a building that is completely catering for academic needs. So if you look at it in terms of the planning, what we've done is we've split the build into two parts, right? And across the two parts, we've kept one wing essentially for academics, and the other wing essentially for faculty spaces like staff rooms, and then research and development setups, and essentially very functional spaces. Now the site is also extremely tight, so we've looked at an option where we work with architecture which is not a double banked but a single banked structure, where you have the central split or the central space between the two built formats that sort of open out into a courtyard and then have completely open pockets and spaces. And if you look at the exploded image on the right hand side top, this is essentially keeping aside a plan that also allows us to expand the entire structure in the future. So we've actually started on the expansion part of the project, and we've got both the documented part of the project before the extension and also what is going on in as work in progress right now. Yeah. So essentially, some of these pictures that you see as a part of what's being displayed over here is essentially these are the two wings that you see, right? And these are cut by central spine, and the central spine essentially has a couple of bridges which are connected at various levels, and it's just completely distinguished by a sort of a courtyard or sort of a walk spine that splits across both the buildings. Now, also due to the setback constraints and the size of the site, so the buildings essentially touch the setback lines, and all around the building we've left about an 8-meter road width for a fire tender. So essentially, we don't have that flexibility to move beyond this. So that was a sort of a way for us to understand how we could adapt to working the entire design as per the constraints of the site, and try and see how we could essentially navigate through these build spaces by not trying to overbuild or just trying to keep a very very simple build form. So as you see, this is just a ground plus one structure at present, and what we've done is essentially wrap this entire building with a brick skin, right? And this brick skin essentially helps in keeping the thermal insulation of the classrooms and the other faculty spaces pretty comfortable in across various weather cycles. And apart from that, it also kind of helps in reducing the dependence on artificial forms of air conditioning, especially, right? Again, you see a few pictures of people walking across these frames, right? So the central spine being completely open. The image on the top right is essentially just a frame of standing in the central space, and then having a person cross across, and you kind of have that very seamless transition between something that is built and something which is semi-built, right? And if you take a look at the images below, it's essentially how classrooms are in the completely bare and rustic form. So we've tried as much as possible to avoid plastering, just leave it in the most rawest form possible and allow the architecture to take over. So essentially the only feature that you have is the brick wall on which the board is mounted, and that is the area where the professor stands and takes the class. So that's the only highlight, or that's the only feature which is there inside these spaces. So we essentially try to keep things as simple as possible, and we look at building only what is necessary and try to avoid any forms of overbuilt architecture. Right now, if you look at this image, right, so this is post the completion of the structure. So essentially the first stage of this was only a ground plus one, right? We did not have the permission to do a ground plus two. And after the completion, and once the OC was received, we've got the green signal to build the floor above. So here we took a relatively different approach, and because the timelines are extremely tight, we've actually finished much more than what we've shown right now. But this is the latest that we have in terms of our documentation at present, and the timeline is a very strict 3 months. So 2 months into the project, we've looked at finishing the entire shell by creating a steel frame, and it's just block work and masonry around. And we've looked at creating these very interesting floating roofs, and these floating roofs are essentially created with an angle of about 15 degrees in order to mount the solar panels on top. So essentially these solar panels on top of the structure which are now mounted are able to harvest close to about 80 kilowatts of electricity. In fact, We've even got the permission or and the possibility to extend to 120 kilowatts over a period of time, but for now we've restricted this to 80. So the idea is to look at this structure as a completely renewable form of completely dependent on renewable sources of energy, rather. So completely working as far as renewable energy is concerned, and we are also able to use this energy to use solar energy from this building and tap this into the other parts of the campus as well. So essentially we're trying to make as much use as the electricity available possible to us, not to just power this building alone, but also the other parts of the campus. Classrooms have been slightly done differently compared to what you've seen in the previous images. So this is more to keep the structure light, and we've also done this on purpose so that we reduce the heft or the heaviness of the structure. So the ground and the first floor are kind of the relatively solid structure that we have, and the floor on the top is essentially trying to create a form of lightness to this, right, and not create an overbuilt not create essentially an overbuilt massing at the end of the day. And what you see essentially inside the classrooms would be simple, clean, crisp white walls with a floating roof, and the clear story lighting that can bring in as much as natural lighting. These clear stories also have a ventilation buffer, so this also allows for natural lighting and ventilation inside these classrooms. And of course all these classrooms have rigged seating formats, as you see. This is snippets of some more work that's ongoing here. So on the left hand side, you see the structure being completed on the outside, and we're just keeping very simple, clean plaster textures on the top, so that the brick is highlighted only at the lower levels. And what you see at the back over here is an extension where we've thought of keeping a small little cafeteria and a coffee shop as an extension of the academic block. So again, some of these work in progress images that you see over here. So we've entirely used cranes to assemble this framework on top of the existing massing, and then do the walls as infills, and then create this structure in a very very short time span. So we are essentially just close to about another 10 to 15 days away from handover. So this is just an illustration. We work a lot with illustrations. So this is a way of understanding how we intervene with our structures, and how essentially we kind of look at putting something one on top of the other, considering the future expansion, the scope and the possibility of future expansion, how this essentially sits on top of the existing structure. And we've just got a small animation of what is on the cafeteria extension as well. So this, as you see, is essentially the extension of the cafeteria right behind the building. So now we'll come to the next project. This is the Boulder House. This is located in Shoolagiri, and this also was featured on the Architects Diary, apart from some of the other publications that we sent out the project to. This is a very simple farmhouse, right? It's located in the hinterlands of Shoolagiri, and essentially part of a hot and dry climate. So the only way that we could look at intervening on these spaces were essentially trying to build with what is already available, or what is rather contextually and locally available to us, right? And since it is a place which is slightly remote and not exactly accessible to the main areas of Shoolagiri, or even close to the national highway, we had certain restrictions of trying to see uh, what kind of resources we could bring in order to bring this project together. So essentially this was achievable through building communities, working with people across the precinct and local villages around the area. And what we did realize is that there is a great potential, especially amongst the local people, to build with mud, and the essential availability of mud, good quality mud in this region, was also a deciding factor for us to try and build with what is on the site. So essentially all the blocks that were created were made on the site using the earth available from here itself, and of course collaborating with the workforce in order to try and see how we how we get these blocks made, this compressed stabilized earth block, and what are the kind of finishes that we could do in terms of mud plastering and in terms of even mud mortar. So even these blocks are also laid with mud mortar. So essentially we've tried to cut down the usage of cement to a very very minimal amount. And this structure is essentially load bearing. So the idea of us to go back to load bearing structures was a way to understand how construction was done in the past, and how a lot of these load bearing structures stand the test of time even today. So if you were to look at it, load bearing structures essentially have a lot of potential, and have that longevity as far as building construction techniques go in today's day and age, right? So this is just a sort of a take for us to try and create something which is a little modern, yet take references from the vernacular architecture that is in and around the local areas and the vicinities. Is also a way to try and see how craftsmanship and the relevance of using mud as an art or as a form of architecture in today's day and age, where it's very difficult to get workmen to execute these kind of built spaces. And I think this is something that we feel proud of ourselves, that it's not the built, but it's the fact that we were able to collaborate with a series of people forming a great community, and which is essentially what this piece of architecture is based upon. So looking at some of these frames, if you see, right, is all about just trying and blending in within the context. And I think somewhere from that point of view, and in terms of climatic context, I think we've been able to bring this reasonably well together. And relatively sustainable in terms of trying to build as naturally as possible. One thing for sure is a space like this is very comfortable and very cool, especially in a place that is exposed to hot and dry climate. So again, some of these photographs that you see, so we are relatively big on light and ventilation, so we try and document our projects with understanding the orientation of the sun path. We also try and open out our architecture very strategically, trying to maximize the amount of daylight during the day, and at the same time trying to capitalize on the ventilation aspect as well. So some of these this frame that you see on the left is essentially trying to create a large scale volume, like a double height volume, and essentially through this we've kept a few air vents as a part of this volume, and then we're able to take out hot air from the lower areas by the use of the stack effect. Right on the right, you'd see a bedroom, again similarly with a higher volume, and again gives a lot of good quality of lighting and ventilation. Again, we are relatively big on taking a lot of these shots in black and white, because this helps us understand the quality of lighting that each of these spaces or each of these frames essentially develop, right? And this project's been shot by a couple of our really close friends who run this studio by the name of Geomorph Photography, and I think they've done a fantastic job in documenting this architectural project. And I think they've made it extremely special and extremely memorable for us. As as architects, we can visualize what we want to build as a part of as a part of a collaboration with the client, but the final visualization of what has been done or what has been achieved is through the lens of a photographer. And I think this is what they have achieved, and they've sort of helped our vision to come to life. So we'll move on to the next one. This is another project, very again similar location as the Boulder farmhouse. This is known as the Saffron Veranda, and this is a farmhouse that is built across a mango orchard. Right, so this is built amidst a mango plantation, and we've built this in such a way that we've not dislodged any single tree from this site. So essentially, all the trees have been retained the way it is, and that's also the reason why the plan has a relatively restricted layout or restricted format, is only because we've not removed any trees in the process, right? So we've tried to build what is essentially available to us and what is around us. And again, this is built using the mud from the side. So essentially, again, compressing of compressed stabilized earth block Bangalore tile roofs for keeping the roofs relatively cool and comfortable. And of course, we've tried to create a few volumes and a series of volumes using illustrations on the slide that you see. So these volumetric analysis generally help us to sort of visualize what kind of spaces we require and how this helps us with lighting, ventilation, and essentially planning out spaces the way they need to be. Again, some of these photographs that you see are essentially, these are work in progress, which is, I mean, this project has almost come to a close. But if you look at some of these photos that you see over here, we've essentially launched a series called Raw, which is a part of our Instagram page. And the reason why we do this is we like to shoot our projects at the stage of completion or towards the stage of completion where we look at it purely from an architectural point of view. These do not come with any furniture or no drapes, curtains, or any other form of soft furnishing. It's all about understanding what the textures, what the material, and the spatial understanding and the volumes, right? So this is essentially for us in a way to celebrate the architecture that we've created across the years of developing this project and trying to mold this grounds up from the site itself. If you see the image on the top right, that is this portion, you would notice that the entire plinth and the foundation has been built using random rubble masonry or random rubble stone. And these random rubble is essentially sourced from granite quarries in the nearby regions, and all these granites which are cut and a lot of these wastes which are generated in these quarries are essentially transported from those places, brought in here and repurposed. So these essentially have a great potential to become a part of your foundation to build. And again, this is a load bearing structure just like the boulder farmhouse as well. We've also made use of some of these old traditional pillars from Karekuri, from the region of Karekuri. So if you can see this frame, we've got some of these pillars brought in, and all these pillars are essentially over I think a century. And we've traveled across to these places to pick the right kind of pillars, and these are pillars that have again stood the test of time, right? So the time where some of these places where in where olden chettinad architecture is being broken down for newer commercial buildings, we try and see how much of value we can in order to take from there and then bring it to our sites here and see how it can be repurposed as a form of our architecture interventions. Again, this is a frame that shows the relation between what's built on the outside. So there are two people standing on the frame on the outside, and how the inside, that is a space inside, has multiple volumes and how it responds to the volumes on the outside, right? This is another farmhouse of ours, known as a hillside farmhouse. So essentially, again, very close by to the saffron veranda. So slightly differently planned. This is a very open sort of a plan that's been created, and again, similarly built. So a lot of these projects that we take up in this region of Shoolagiri and Krishnagiri essentially are built out of mud. And the reason for us to do that is by understanding what is available in and around the context, and we've always tried to utilize as much as context as possible. So is essentially a reason to why we end up doing a lot of earth related construction in the projects that we take up in this particular region. Again, looking at multiple volumes here, and if you see some of the images at the bottom, we also understand how specks of light or patterns of light are essentially thrown across the entire volume, across empty spaces, so that you do understand what kind of impact lighting plays in the architecture that's been created over here, right? So next one that we're doing is another farmhouse in the hinterlands of Denkani Kote. Again, surrounded by a slightly sort of a hillock, and again a hot and dry region. Again in the in the remote regions of slightly remote regions of Tamil Nadu. Here, what we've tried to work with is again working with various volumes, and again trying this exercise of breaking down some of these volumes to see how we can accommodate various spaces. So most of the plans that we do essentially for farms are open plan layouts. We try to build with very minimal or next to no internal walls anywhere as far as we try and design these spaces. And essentially the understanding of trying to create volumes across various heights is only for the sake of ventilation and lighting. Ventilation so that use a stack effect wherever possible and take out the hot air possible. In these regions, especially in Tamil Nadu, in hot and dry parts of Tamil Nadu, we try and avoid using RCC as much as possible, considering that we would like to cut down the amount of heat gain inside the structure essentially, right? And this is another one that we're doing at the foothills of Nandi, known as Krishna Kutira. This is based on trying to understand the traditional take of the Gutumani in Bangalore, essentially southern Karnataka, and our clients are based out of Udupi, and we've tried to bring in some of the elements of the Gutumani, or the architecture which is repurposed or which is brought in from that part of Udupi into the region of Nandi Hills. This is also another work in progress and ongoing project which has almost come up close to the completion stage. So for a weekend home, essentially, even this is a project which is almost about 2,500 square feet, and we've looked at creating this across seamless volumes, and through volumetric understanding of spaces, we've tried to create wherever possible, the usage of mud plaster and some amount of wire cut, exposed wire cut brick wherever it is possible, in order to keep the entire structure as natural and earthy as possible. It's just an again a view of us trying to understand what kind of a structure would be created upon assembling everything together. So again, work in progress. We will be releasing shoots and completed pictures of this project very soon, probably in the next 2-3 months, or early next year we'll be releasing some of these shots. So yeah, essentially these are some of the projects that we've been doing, Simran. So I think with this I would like to come to the end of my presentation. You could let me know if I would need to continue sharing the screen, or if I could close the screen.
Yeah, you can close the screen, no issues.
Yeah. So I hope this was hopefully insightful
Yes,
to in terms of, yeah.
it was a really wonderful presentation. I mean, I love the way you play with the volumes in your projects. I mean, the way the natural light comes inside, it's really beautiful to look at, and I think the users get to experience a space which they look for. I think whenever it's a either it's a weekend home or maybe it's their residence. I think this is what the clients want. I think at the end.
So essentially, I think the challenge that we always find, right, Simran, is there are certain similarities, or there are certain overlaps in
Right.
our projects, and I'll tell you why. Because the reference always comes from one client through another, and essentially what ends up happening is we always tell our clients to go and a potential client rather
Hmm.
to go and see a space that we've designed, right, previously. And many of them go or visit them, and very rarely they see them through photographs, but they actually do go and visit. So what essentially ends up happening is they do like certain references, especially in terms of volumes that are generated. So it just ends up saying that when it's working for someone else's project, please make it work for mine, right? So there's always this a sort of a debate that we create, saying no, we want to do something a little more different, but then it ends up sort of overlapping or just coming back, only because this is something that's been working well in terms of, I'm not just saying design, but I'm also just saying in terms of climate responsive
Yes,
architecture, right? So that is what people want at the end of the day. And what we've come to realize at the end of the day, that it's the end user's space, right? And
definitely.
it's not something that we want to fight over, or we want to argue over, right? Because that is something they find comfort in, and if there is something that they like from what they've seen before, then fair enough, that is something that they want at the end of the day. So we're trying not to create, very consciously trying not to create statement pieces of architecture that would satisfy us, right? But at the end of the day, it has to satisfy them. So
Right.
sometimes we are not, but it's okay, as long as they're satisfied, I think for them, for us, their satisfaction is our satisfaction at the
Definitely.
end of the day.
Right, right. I think it's a task, as you mentioned, to not, let the previous design have the impact on the next design that's going to be there. But I think that's the
Exactly.
challenge, and we, as architects, we get to play with it.
Absolutely, and in fact, we've the many clients who've approached us have not even come up with a brief, but they've always asked us the question like, can you build us something in mud, or can you build us something which is with a natural material?
Right.
And then we ask them, hey, okay, fine, that's okay, but can you help us out with the brief? Can you,
Hmm.
frame your requirements for us, and then maybe think, and most of the times, right, believe it or not, they've told us that, what, you guys come out with what you can, right? You put the brief, you put the requirement,
Yes.
and then we'll start building over it. So this becomes like a very interactive and collaborative exercise, and that is where references are taken from some of the
Hmm.
older projects, because we give them that bandwidth to go see that space, interact with the client whom we've worked for and worked with before.
Right.
And that also becomes a testimony in terms of how, they've enjoyed those spaces, and how a potential client working with us could also enjoy a space
Right.
of a similar kind, or anything which is slightly different. So that in a way has been quite interesting and quite overwhelming for us, because for us, honestly, it's been the other way around. We create the brief, and then we sort of help the client go through that entire
Right.
process.
Right. Right. Right.